Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jaganeri Arias, and I'm the director of the Center for Cultural Liberation. It's so exciting to be here with all of you via Zoom. Hopefully, you all got a chance to enjoy the nice weather today, and if not, hopefully you'll get a chance later today since our days are getting a little bit longer. So today we're here to have our keynote speaker for APIDA Heritage Month. Dr. Cheng has been kind enough to agree to be our keynote speaker. So she will be giving us the keynote address titled Not Quite Asian, Asian Americans and the Other in the Era of the Pandemic and Anti-Asian Racism. So this event is sponsored by the Center for Cultural Liberation, Student Life, the English Department, Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation, the School of Social Work, and of course, all of the folks on the APIDA Heritage Month Planning Committee. So thank you all so much for joining us. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you the president of APIDA and Junior Chelsea Zhao.
Thank you, Jackie. Hi, my name is Chelsea, and I will be introducing Dr. Ada Cheng. So Dr. Ada Cheng is a professor turned storyteller, solo performer, and storytelling show producer. She was a tenured professor in sociology at DePaul University from 2001 to 2016, when she resigned to pursue storytelling and performances full-time. She has been featured in storytelling shows and done her 2 solo performances all over the country. Ada is a producer and host of 5 storytelling shows, including Pour One Out, Am I Mine Enough, Talk Stories, an Asian American, Asian Diaspora Storytelling Show, Speaking Truth series, and This is America, Truths Through My Body. She creates platforms for people to tell difficult and vulnerable stories, as well as for communities who may not have the opportunities otherwise. She's an adjunct professor at Dominican University and a speaker for Illinois Humanities Speakers Bureau program. She works full-time as an education and outreach specialist with Women's Leadership and Resource Center at UIC. And her motto, make your life the best story you tell.
All right, thank you so much, Jackie and Chelsea. How's everyone doing? Thank you so much for being here. 6 o'clock, dinner time, so I really appreciate you being here. So since I'm a storyteller, I'm not going to give a formal speech. I turn off with 10 minutes people talking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a solo performance and share 3 stories. Not quite. It was a solo show that I created in 2017. Because of the structure, it is very easy for me to add new content. So I'm going to share with you 3 stories, and that will be constituting the solo, not quite. The stories they've been written in recent years. And so I will walk you through the process and explain when this was written. So what we would do is simply let me tell my stories, and then after I'm done, we'll have a conversation. And each piece highlight a theme or themes that affect Asian American experiences. Does that sound good? And feel free to, if you want to make comments through chat, I may not be able to respond or read immediately, but feel free to do so. So the first piece is entitled, and it was written, the incident happened in late 2019. So it was written toward the end of 2019 or early 2020. And it's entitled, Dear White Woman. Dear white woman, I regretted saying nothing to you, so I'm writing this letter. It was a good day that first Friday in October 2019, sunny and cool. It was around 2 p.m. I just finished presenting my gender-based violence workshop at the medical school at UIC. I had started this new job with the university in July, and this workshop was the first major one I had to conduct with this new position. I was happy because I thought everything went well, so well that the student organizers told me that they wanted me back in spring. I was feeling proud, standing in front of the medical school building entrance on Polk Street. When I ordered a lift to return to my office, you were right there dropping off someone. I was elated that I didn't have to wait long. The day is really going my way, I thought to myself. I got into a car and said, "Thank you so much. How are you?" My standard greeting to a Lyft driver. You glanced at me through the mirror and said, "I'm good. Where are you from?" Just like that. We're sitting inches from each other, yet the chasm between us suddenly feels like 1,000 miles. I paused. "Where are you from?" is one of my most dreaded questions. I was asked so very often before becoming a citizen in 2015. It was simple when I first arrived in this country from Taiwan as a student back in 1991. I was foreign after all, with my stronger accent then and wearing clothing I brought from home. Yet, with each passing year or decade, this question has become more complicated and layered. I can no longer answer it with ease. This question was posed to me even after I became a citizen in May 2015. That same afternoon, after the naturalization ceremony, and the days and the weeks and the months and the years afterwards, that question never stopped. Why would I have expected anything different? The certificate of naturalization, that piece of paper certifying my citizenship status, didn't change anyone's perception of me as someone from somewhere else. My status might have changed, but my face didn't. I mean, my accent wasn't that thick, so thick that you will mistake me as foreign. You had no other references than this face of mine, the only marker of difference, just like a million other faces from Asia. And when I hesitated, you asked, "Originally?" Like I didn't know what you were asking. Like I didn't already have a script for this question. Like I hadn't answered the same question over and over. Like I hadn't said originally myself many times before. Like my silence was my lack of understanding of your words or English. No, I was killing you softly in the back seat with my gaze filled with both sorrow and rage, calculating how much I should let your remark and therefore you shape the rest of my day or days after that. When I told you I was from Taiwan, you started talking about how your brother-in-law was working there and how he loved it. I asked you which city he was living on the island. You couldn't say. You simply went on and on about his beautiful experiences in Asia. I wanted to tell you, I don't care. I mean, do you even know the difference between Taiwan and Thailand? Because many Americans can't even distinguish these two countries because the first part for these two words sounds exactly the same. I wanted to lecture you about profiling though. A softer type of profiling, the type of profiling that doesn't kill us, but it marks us as different. It tells us we don't belong. It is a form of racial profiling masked as cultural curiosity, often loved by both liberals and conservatives alike, pretending to be cosmopolitan. Yet culture is no substitute for race. You might ask, does it mean I can't ask this question at all? Of course, it is not that you can't ask it. It is how and when you ask the question. It is the context within which you ask it. Context is everything. Ask yourself, is it how you greet every human being you come across on your drive, in the party, on the street? Or do you direct this phrase to only people with certain facial features, features deemed as foreign and alien, or shall I say, exotic? There are millions of people with facial features similar to mine who were born in the United States. This is the place they call home. They are not from somewhere else. They have always been here. By asking them that question, you're telling them they don't fit the image of what an American should be. Where are you from marks someone as an outsider, outside of a norm and the standard against which you used to judge them. I'm the other, against the white faces you count as American. Whether I was indeed born somewhere else is beside the point. I might be a citizen on paper, but it is still a long way to belong and to call this country home, even after 3 decades. Let me tell you a story. I once performed my solo Not Quite at Des Moines, Iowa. During the talkback, a middle-aged white woman vehemently disputed my comment about the racial implications of this phrase. She insisted that she could not be racist since her husband, sitting right next to her, was a Chinese man from Hong Kong. It was as if her physical proximity to a person of color could excuse or exonerate her of any bias or prejudice. She said that she was simply curious about other cultures. Insisting on her good intentions, she wouldn't stop arguing until another white audience asked her to ponder this question: who is in the rightful place to define racism? I believe you if you say you were simply trying to be friendly, except benevolent intentions don't always matter, especially when they lead to harmful impact. Not on you, but on me. It should have been a great day for me. Instead, I spent the 7-minute ride debating if I should get out of the car, if saving $5 was worth my dignity, if I should educate you as opposed to simply enjoying my existence, if I should trade dignity for convenience, if I should stay quiet while struggling with my own conscience and doubting if I did the right thing with my silence. All the energy that should have been reserved for my joy that day was wasted on you, while you were so oblivious to everything. I used to intervene until my energy was completely drained, until I no longer had joy in life. And then I realized this: not every fight should be my fight. I have to pick my battle just to preserve some sanity, so I can thrive, not just survive. So I sulked in the back seat and decided that I would write you a letter entitled, "Dear White Woman, I consider this piece your compensation for my short ride with you. Best, Ada." Thank you. So this is my first piece, and there are issues that come out of it, and we'll talk about it later. I'm going to read a second piece, which is a story retold. This is written after the mass shooting in Atlanta. A trigger warning involves sexual assault. So I want you to take care of yourself. It took me 10 years. In February 2020, I was invited by a faculty member from Global Asian Studies program at UIC to do presentations for his Asian American courses. The presentation was entitled Sexual Assault on College Campus and Asian American Experiences. The presentation was different for me for at least 2 reasons. It was the first time that I presented for college classes with predominantly Asian American students. Staring at faces similar to mine hit me viscerally. It was also the first time that I did something very different with my materials. I started my talk with the following major topics: the American colonization in Asia, her military political interventions in the Asian region, and the United States' racist and imperialist legacy in Asia. The constructed images of Asian women as docile, submissive, exotic, sensual, and sexually willing, and the sexual fetishization of Asian American women. The historical, symbolic, and cultural emasculation and desexualization of Asian American men. The necessity to center race in sexual assault discourse. Why is race, or why are racialized images central to our understanding of sexual assault? If you're perceived to be submissive, docile, sensual, exotic, and fetishized, is it possible that your objections, even if they are firm, can be disregarded over and over? Is it possible that if you're perceived to be sexually willing and available, your rejections, even if they're clear and persistent, can be fantasized in a twisted way to mean affirmations? Immediately after the class, a student approached me and said, "Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate the way you approached this topic. You made this material relevant to me and my experiences." I knew what she meant. She didn't mean that my presentation was relevant to her as a woman. She meant it was relevant to her as an Asian woman in this country. Her remark shook me to my core. Not only in terms of how I should do training on gender-based violence in the future, but also how I had to re-examine my own sexual assault. I had to ask myself, why did I tell the story the way I did? Why did I leave out certain details? And most importantly, why was my identity as an Asian woman never given a proper place in my own public account of the story? My sexual assault took place in 2010. He was a colleague of mine in the department at a well-known university in Chicago. He was a friend, a progressive faculty, and a comrade, one who will march with women and speak for us. Yet he sexually assaulted me despite my repeated rejections. I couldn't even name it as rape until another close colleague of mine named it for me. I could not reconcile his good man image in public with the violence he committed in private. I'm not even sure if he was aware of the dissonance either. I have told the story in public a few times and published it in print since 2016. I left out something important. I decided not to discuss race in the story to mitigate the stereotyping that might ensue. My colleague is an immigrant of color, a member of a marginalized community. I left out the detail because of the larger political landscapes of our time. In 2015, when Donald Trump came out running for presidency, his campaign relied on demonizing immigrants, particularly immigrant men of color, constructing them as drug dealers, traffickers, criminals, rapists. I didn't want this to become another statistic contributing to the portrayal of immigrant men of color as the villain in our larger political and cultural landscapes. Since I did not name his race, I didn't explore how my own race might have played a part in my own victimization. I've been troubled by my own admission, since my racial identity as an Asian woman has been central in my existence as an immigrant woman of color in this country and my experiences as an immigrant woman of color faculty in academia. In a way, my colleagues have dismissed my presence, appropriated my intellectual labor, and discounted my contributions. In a way, my students have disregarded my authority as a tenured faculty member. And in a way, I have been told to go back to my own country and consistently asked where I'm from originally, even after I became a citizen in 2015. How could race be so salient in all my experiences as an immigrant woman of color, yet so absent at this moment of intimate violation? What other pernicious effects can this erasure of race have? What I didn't say to students in 2020 is this: is it possible that because of these images developed and constructed out of American racist, colonial, and imperialist legacies, you will be perceived as a complicitous collaborator in your own sexual assault, not only by others, but also by yourself? Is it possible that we also come to see ourselves as complicit in the violence against us? I did, questioning myself in terms of the legitimacy of the rape, because there was no brute force, because it was not in the dark alley, because he was no stranger but someone I trusted, because I didn't fight back and yell, because I thought I was salvage of friendship, and because I stayed quiet and let it go afterwards, pretending nothing had happened. Exactly the same way I dealt with anti-Asian racism early on in my life in this country. On March 16, a white man murders 8 people in Atlanta, among them 6 Asian women. In the press conference, the sheriff minimized the violence against these Asian women by labeling it as the shooter's trouble with sexual addictions. Within 1 month of my arrival in this country in 1991, I learned a particular form of racial profiling unique to me as an Asian woman via this phrase: I like Asian women. This phrase has been said to me millions of times throughout the decades. by men of all races, particularly white men. The key word here is Asian, not woman. Men are looking for a particular set of titillating images and stereotypes in me. I'm not important. The collective we that they have been fantasizing is what satisfies their sexual desire. I'm never just a woman. I have always been an Asian woman. In an effort to protect my perpetrator, I never once asked how my identity as an Asian woman, as well as the images based on the racist misogyny in his fantasies, might have played a role in his repeated refusals to accept my rejections. I obscure the fact that I had consistently experienced racialized misogyny and sexism from men of color. Even until this day, I still do not know how to address the harm done to one another within marginalized communities. I wrote myself, the inseparable Asian woman, out of my own narratives and blended myself within the abstract category of woman. When you write yourself out of your own stories, there's no story to tell for you or about you. It took me 10 years. Let them not be your 10. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let them not be your 10. I just wrote recently. The last piece is called A Letter to My Younger Self. I get emotional all the time. So if I started crying, that's me being Ada, and that's so with the emotions. I work at UIC, and this story is a series of email exchanges between myself and a student who experienced anti-Asian racism, didn't know where to send the email, but it got to me. And this is our email exchanges. This incident took place in February last year. I didn't change anything to this event, for this event, because I want you to listen how I was even feeling more than a year ago without having to witness the intensification of anti-Asian racism. Dear university staff, hello. I want to report an insulting incident that happened to us today. My friends and I were at this building trying to grab some coffee. We were waiting in line, and finally, when it was our turn to order, we stepped forward. During that short time, we heard an absurd racist joke that people at the cashier made saying, "Watch out for the coronavirus." As everyone knows, the coronavirus is a global issue that has taken away more than 500 innocent lives. Treating us as that virus is both humiliating and insulting to the people who are suffering and fighting for that contagious disease. It is very unfortunate that this occurred during the Black History Month, the month that we all believe everyone should not be discriminated by the color of their skin. I hope you examine this issue. We sincerely want an apology for this inconvenience. Sincerely, student. Dear student, thank you for the message. I'm very sorry this happened to you. I would like to meet in person to discuss the situation further. Let me know when you can stop by. Ada. Dear Ada, thank you for your kindness. We were all furious about the incident. However, After knowing that there are people who actually care for minorities like us, it gives us pride knowing that we chose to come to the school. Again, thank you for offering us the option to deal with this matter. But we have decided not to make a scene. Student. Dear student, I don't think you will ever read this message. I do hope at some point you will tell the story on your own. I haven't been able to sleep for days since I received your email. That last sentence, we have decided not to make a scene, hit me hard. That sentence has filled me with sadness. It feels like someone has driven a knife slowly into my heart. I'm not going to die from it, but my heart aches and bleeds with each gentle cut and push. Your message was the first complaint I received, but it was not the first one I have heard. Since the outbreak of the coronavirus, we have seen an increase of hatred toward Chinese people, people of Asian descent, or Asian American in general. Physical assaults have taken place, racial slurs hurled, suspicious looks cast, masks put on specifically when Asian people are present. Otherwise, socially conscious people making jokes and references about the virus and Chinese people. Businesses in Chinatown plummeted due to misinformation, xenophobia, and racism. In a world where racism is often seen between Black and white, discrimination, prejudice, racism, and xenophobia toward and against Asians are often taken for granted and normalized, that even UC at Berkeley briefly posted something online along the line. Xenophobia is a normal response after the outbreak. Our own president insists on calling the virus Chinese or Wuhan virus, knowing fully well that the pandemic will bring our pre-existing hatred, xenophobic sentiments, and racist assaults against people of Asian descent. Different universities send warning emails to students about the virus, yet very few make public statements denouncing anti-Asian racism. We don't label any germ, disease, illness, and virus white when they wiped out Native American tribes. Why do we label Corona Asian? The pandemic shows how easily we as Asian Americans can go from being model minority to yellow peril in this country within seconds. But what I want to write here is not about the virus. It is about that last sentence of yours. We have decided not to make a scene. I truly see you because you remind me of my younger self. When I used to believe that people would understand where I was coming from and empathize my position if I were polite enough, respectful enough, articulate enough, or liked enough. And then it dawned on me one day, my degree of politeness, respectfulness, or likability has little to do with whether people can grasp the complexity of issues. For many, they understand them all alone. In my or our culture, I was taught since I was young to be quiet, to not speak up, to not challenge authorities, and to keep peace and maintain harmony. I had to work very hard to develop my own voice and to have one. When I was younger, I tried hard to balance between having a voice and wanting to be liked, having ideas and opinions and being seen too opinionated and loud, and telling people how I really felt and what I really thought, and not wanting to alienate anyone with my truth. I still struggle with it, and I'm in my 50s. The reality is there's no balance. It is a lose-lose situation for me as a woman. I do have the benefit of racial perception. I'm hardly seen as militant or aggressive as an Asian woman, even when I am, compared to a Black woman who can easily be seen as aggressive, even when she is simply being assertive. My body, as much as it may be sexually objectified, exoticized, or violated, is not seen as threatening, thus allowing me to freely navigate the world without anyone calling the police on me. And we know the ways our bodies are perceived can have life and death consequences. But the worst part is this. When you don't practice speaking up for yourself, you end up losing the only voice you have, your own. I want you to remember this. Silence can be a strength, but it isn't always a virtue. Being quiet doesn't always bring you the peace. Being polite doesn't always keep you out of trouble. Being respectful doesn't always get you the respect in return. Please learn to tell your own story, as I can't always tell stories for others. Learn to shout on top of your lungs. Make a scene. Be the troublemaker. Be the trouble for yourself and others. It's time. It's time. Ada. Thank you so much. This concludes the solo, the 3 sets of stories exploring issues. Oh gosh, I kind of get emotional myself. Why don't we open up and have a conversation? The stories, each of them deals with different aspects of some of the persistent stereotypes and images that Asian Americans face. And they do have harmful consequences in ways. So why don't we simply open up the conversation? How do people feel? We can start with feelings and thoughts that you have about the 3 stories.
I just want to say thank you so much for all the 3 stories you have shared. I was talking with someone who graduated from Dominican in 2020 as a nursing student, and she lives in Chinatown. And I remember after the Atlanta shooting, I asked her if she was doing okay. And she said she's just feeling scared of what might happen to Chinatown because there's a lot of crimes in that area in the recent year. So thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, and we'll come back to address that in a little bit. How about other people? How do you feel? What resonates with you? What touches you? Anything?
Ada, I want to thank you for, I'm 64, so these issues of a calling to and empowering the future generation, don't get tired and to speak your story, because those of us from the 70s, this story was still from the 68. You know, I haven't heard the word racism for so many times between 1970 and today, and I'm glad to hear the word being thrown about. I'm a interesting event. I'm a counselor, and I had to move my practice online to stay safe. And there was a flood of requests for counseling from Asian American, Asian British, Asian Canadian women who wanted support. And my blind spot, because I was born here, was I thought, oh, it's because of my years of experience as a psychotherapist. And they all said, no, it's because you're Asian. and you'll understand. And they felt safe telling me their story. So I really thank you for encouraging people to find their voice and tell their stories. Because, you know, a therapist can listen to the stories, but it's really the comfort that people find is your story is heard, and that you're not invisible, and that you're not, that your message is strong and you deserve to be respected. So I'm sorry that those things happened to you. We've all had our trauma, and to have the courage to tell your story, to empower other people, I really commend you for that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. One thing I want to emphasize, you know, oftentimes, if you can name the problem, you're not going to solve the problem.
Right.
Right? For example, we're attuned to the visceral, physical, visible violence, right? It happened. Well, this is a historical issue. Anti-racism is not just recent phenomenon, right? It happens hundreds of years. But it was not until we see people getting physically assaulted, beaten up with the frequency and the severity that we started to think we take it for granted, we take it as an issue, right? But here's the thing: is the physical, the visible, the violence, right? The violent form of violence is simply one form. And most often time is the tip of the iceberg, is something that we see at the top. But deep down, there is that mild form or racial racism, or we use a euphemism, microaggression. Microaggression, racialized microaggression is racism itself. But we name it as a microaggression, but it is racism. But it is those forms of racism that it permeated our daily life, and oftentimes through our interactions with one another, interactions with our colleagues, with interaction with strangers, interaction with our students, that we experience that process of othering, right? A particular form of racial profiling. And that's the one that it cuts your soul, because it cuts you. It doesn't kill you, but it cuts you. It's like a knife that is so dull that it won't kill you with one cut, but it really just cuts deep into your heart, just with each cut, with each. And that's the most difficult part, because you won't die from it, but it cuts into your soul. It damages your psyche and hurts you emotionally. And those are the forms of racism, the so-called microaggression, that I want to speak to. The things that oftentimes we don't know how to name them, and we are afraid to name because we don't know if we're making a big deal out of it, right? Is that sometimes I think a lot of us, I'm not unique, we're asking ourselves, is this racism, right? And at some point, the only way to confirm that is if we name it as is. And that's the thing that I want people to pay attention to. We pay attention to the visible one, but also how about the interactions, but also the institutionalized form of racism. And how do we understand the different racialization process for different groups? And that's something that this solo is speaking about. How about other people? How do you feel?
I wanted to say thank you for your first story. Almost every Asian woman, including myself, I've talked to has had an experience like that. And I think it's oftentimes hard for me to like put exactly what I'm feeling and thoughts like into place, but everything you said, like I felt before as well. And I know many others who have felt the same way. So I just want to thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. And othering takes on many different forms, right? There are different ways that we mark one another as different in racial, gender, class term. And that's something for us to really think about. What are the ways, what are the things that we say to mark others as different? And I call where you're from, that's a racial profiling. I didn't used to call it that way, right? But it is. Because every time when you say it, it's about context. You profile someone as different, right? As the other, and something to think about. Thank you so much. How about other people? What resonates with you?
So something you mentioned, and I think it was a middle story about, just your self-awareness of being marginalized and as in your identity as an Asian woman, but still recognizing your place in society compared to other women, right? Compared to Black women, compared to maybe other women of color or other marginalized people. And I think that's something I think it's so tough to do at places like Dominican, where, most of our students do come from a marginalized background of, all kinds of sorts, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, immigration statuses, all kinds of marginalized backgrounds. And it can be tough to sort of centralize still our own experience when we are surrounded by people who may be even more marginalized than we are in a particular place. So I really respect you for doing that.
And for example, that first story, where are you from? And that's a question that other different groups can relate to as well, right? Students of Latino descent, they get asked that same question as well. And that's the perpetual foreigner. And we know which groups in this country get seen as a perpetual foreigner. Asian, Latinos, right? And that's something for me is important to think of. And for example, the second piece about the Asian women image, I also know the different types of image that are applicable to, for example, Black women, Latina women. And so for me in storytelling is really, I can still center my experiences without erasing others. And the point is really for us to have a comparative perspectives and to see how each group are racialized differently, and under the structure of white supremacy, right? And so it's all comparative. And so I want to, while telling my stories, but also recognizing my oppression and privileges at the same time, because it's important to understand both and to really talk about both at the same time. It's not easy to do. So I can see when I talk to students at Dominican or UIC, I can see our shared experiences, I can see the differences, and that's how we build solidarity as well. Not just we build solidarity, not just across sameness, but also across difference. How about other people? What do you think about what strikes you? What touches you?
I'll say something, Ada,
Please
if
do.
that's okay.
Yes.
Just thank you again for your performance. I know it's the end of the semester and everybody's exhausted, including you, and thanks for all the organizers. I guess just thanks, Ada, for giving me hope. I heard your UIC student piece. Me, you, and Chelsea did the panel at Caritas Veritas, and I like hearing your stories because it kind of marks time for me. And we heard it, we did a panel at Caritas Veritas in September. Okay, so, right, pandemic, but the anti-Asian violence is going on, but, not as bad as, it got worse, right? And then with the massacre in Atlanta of the Asian American women, it just exploded, but now it's down again. So I guess I just want to say, thank you for reminding me and things I've heard from others too, and just what's happened after Atlanta with the anti-Asian hate crimes is that, right, these things are there. They're there, they're in these little things. And some of the issues that Michelle, and I've heard from like these high school students at like OPRF, what they're going through, I'm like, this is what I went through in the 70s too, growing up, right? So I guess my question is also, how do we know we're we're improving, right? Because you think, oh, well, it can't be that bad. And then Asians start getting beat up and on the street and killed and stuff. And you're like, oh, this is actually worse than I thought, right? So I think like these little things, right? We tell our stories and we keep pushing, and then people tell their stories, right? Including the non-Asian Americans, and we keep pushing. But then I guess my question is also like, how do we know it's helping? Because it just got, like with the pandemic and coronavirus, it just, like you said, model a minority to, whatever, virus threat in overnight, right? Or in the same day.
I don't know how about measuring the whether we're improving, but I can share this anecdote. My granddaughter, who's 4, is part African American and part Cambodian. And one of the ways that grandma is helping with the remote learning and overwhelmed parents with children trying to do their homework at home, they created a channel where the grandkids can give a shout out to grandma. So I got a message from my granddaughter, "Grandma," and she was crying, "Grandma." I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, she's 4. "They call me Blasian. Why are they calling me Blasian?" What do you say to that? And so grandma's heart hurt with a cut. And I said, "Honey, you are you. And and you hold your head high." That's what my father taught me. They're going to call you names. You are who you are. And that's just insensitive people. They hurt your heart, huh? And she said, "Yeah." And so you're okay. You're who you are. You're not turned in. Because I remember when I was called names at 5, I thought, what, I've suddenly turned into somebody else? I'm who I am. So that's a call to not lose energy. And yes, we've got to keep measuring. Are we making progress? I'm so glad that I encountered Ada's presentation the other week. I'm a professor of social work in Indiana. And, where there needs to be some voice. I agree. It's like a speak up, because I don't want my granddaughter to go through the same things again. So
one thing, great, is it improved better? Is it worse? One thing why I think it's so important to speak out is it's not because the older generations don't have stories. They do. They have. You can ask people, I mean, in my 50s, you ask people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, do they have stories about racism? Yes, they do. And I'm speaking in it as, simply as I'm also an immigrant, and simply from that vantage point, that I also find myself and some the people that I talk to, not all, where we have this perception that we have to be good, right? Immigrant, right? You don't make a fuss. You're the guest in this country, right? So even if you experience something, you try your best to get along. You don't make a scene. That's why that sentence really struck me to the core. It was the sentence that really broke me down is, yes, I relate to that. You want to be a good guest on this land, borrowed land. And so you try to make it the best you can, right? But here, that's one, right, where people have stories, but they don't tell these stories of racism. And sometimes people we also fall into the trap of Olympics oppression, right? This oppression Olympics where because it is not as bad in comparison to other groups, and therefore we can shut up. We don't, right? I get told a lot, and people would tell me, "Why are you complaining? You're a professor." And this is what I said: privileges don't cancel out your oppression. Privileges simply make your oppression look very different, right? But I get told a lot, "You're a professor, why are you complaining? You have citizenship, why are you complaining?" And over again, this assumption because of the oppression Olympics that it is not as bad in comparison, therefore we shouldn't speak up. There's that as well. But here's also the thing, there's also the persistent stereotypes about Asian that we are quiet. So even when we engage in social activism, when we are out there protest, we seem to be invisible, right? We're never seen as the one in solidarity with others, even though there has been a long history of Black and Asian solidarity. Even though we're part of the movement, yet our presence also tends to be erased. That's also another thing to think about. So I can't answer the question, is it improving? The oppression simply takes on very different forms for our generation. Racism simply takes on very different forms for us in this situation, in our generation. I can make that statement whether it's better. In some way it is, some way it is not, right? So that's something that I struggle with a lot. How about other people? We have 2 minutes left. I want to respect time. I know this is until 7 o'clock. So I want to thank everyone who you show up here. I really appreciate you being here, support. And so I appreciate you. Thank you so much. And I would turn it back to Jackie or Chelsea to have the wrap up for the event.
Thank you so much, Dr. John. We're really, really appreciative of you being here with us. Again, it is the end of the semester, so we appreciate everyone being here. And we hope that you will continue to engage in these conversations beyond today, right? These conversations need to continue on at the university level as well as at the US level. So I hope you all have a wonderful day and enjoy beautiful weather. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, everybody. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.